So MSPs, I think, on the rise now from an M&A perspective. The latest reports that I'm getting is that the market is hot. There's a lot of premiums being paid for MSPs right now. And what's driving that? I'm not entirely sure. Access to capital is one of them. There's also, I think, some of those maybe early founders have reached their retirement age. They're ready to move on and
Right.
take on the next stage of their life. But I think next 3 to 5 years, I believe that there's growth there. Also the ability for a positive exit event.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of From the Trenches, a Bering McKinley Vision podcast series we got going on. Quick thing to remember. We're not trying to sell you anything. This isn't, you're going to get some big action item or to-do list. This is just two guys talking about technology, talking about MSP, probably talking a little bit of accounting, given our guest today. So just sit back, enjoy. If you got comments, comment. If you'd like to, share, subscribe. It means a lot. But today we've got our buddy Doug with us. And Doug, how did you find yourself in this crazy MSP world?
Yeah. Hey, Josh, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. And, my journey into the MSP world starts in 2017. I was working for a large pharmaceutical company. You may have heard of them in 2017. They were making this device called EpiPens. And if you recall the EpiPen scandal, it was hot and heavy, and I was working in this large 30,000 employee company. And I had a little bit of a moment of like, this isn't right for me. I need something a little bit smaller. I want to do something different. And so, just a pure job search, what's available in and around the Pittsburgh area. And I kind of fell into an MSP, and, it seemed safe to me. It was a private equity backed company, that was, looking to grow, and, maybe a potential upside of, what an exit event could look like with that MSP. And so, interviewed and, been involved, I guess, in the MSP ecosystem since. But yeah, the journey was just a pure job search, and happened to land at an MSP.
Now, as an accountant, as a financials guy, you go from, Fortune billion companies to no matter what size that MSP was, it was modest compared to where you came from. How odd was that a transition for you, if odd at all?
Yeah, it was, I'd say night and day, as far as, the firepower and maybe the tools and systems involved in doing the accounting. I went from, that large corporation, Fortune 100, whatever, where, everything was like real time. It was like by the minute. And, we had a team of, hundreds, if not thousands of people working on the accounting and finance. Right. And then when we went over to when I transitioned into the MSP world, then I had a team of, I don't know, maybe five or six. Right. So it was much different. So, I'd say it was just really apples and oranges, as far as, what I was used to. But then, also what became relevant to me or apparent was that, the MSP world or a smaller company was a much better fit for me. Because, I viewed it as having a seat at the table where decisions were being made. Whereas, at the Fortune 100 company, I was, seats and seats away, from having a seat at that table. So, I guess with, some pros and cons, but, for the most part for me, my preference was to be in the new environment, smaller company, less people, and, the ability to kind of solve problems, on a little bit of a smaller scale.
Yeah, it makes sense. So when you're at these, because you also did some time at a big four firm as well.
Sure.
And I've heard the pros and cons of that, and it's like, okay, you can go there, then you go to a huge pharmaceutical, then you land at the really small firm where you actually get to see it at the table. how do you feel like, because in accounting, I feel like you have so much responsibility. Did you feel really natural having that seat at the table, or were you like, "Oh crap, I'm not feeling great about my ability to lead them financially," or had all that time led you to being really able to contribute in a safe way?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'd say it was a little bit of a, a growth for me to get comfortable with that responsibility. But more so, not to personalize it or be selfish in the conversation, but was a lot of it was around, what was I comfortable doing, or what did I enjoy doing? If I go back to my time at Deloitte in the in the auditing world, uh, you know, auditing is interesting. It's necessary, and I do believe that I could have continued to rise at Deloitte. But what became apparent was, do I really feel like I'm driving decisions? I'm driving value, by providing audit services. And so that kind of spoke to me and started to lead me to a different path. And then I got into the corporate world and kind of hit my head again on that, like, well, I don't have that seat at the table. So, when I finally did, get to that point with the MSP to have a seat at the table, I'd say at first, there was a little bit of, there was a little bit of a transition of not being comfortable with that responsibility, but then over time, just kind of working through it, understanding. One thing that resounds in my head that I had to learn through my career is that businesses are resilient. My first stop outside of Deloitte, I remember, like, knowing to the day of, like, oh my gosh, this company might close its doors on this day, right? And that was a small pharmaceutical startup, and so I had that date in my mind. Well, it turns out that once I left that company, it actually went through a sale and sold to Pfizer for like multi billions of dollars, right? So Doug thought this company has no future, and then boy was I wrong, because it was resilient and made it there. So I guess, taking that into account, that's some of that experience that I took with me once I got that seat at the table and said, okay, even though I think this decision today is going to, impact this company, right? And I have to make that right decision. I also recognize that there's going to be, it's actually going to continue on, and there's going to be more decisions to really go through. So it took a little bit of adjusting, but it was also, I guess, an enjoyable adjustment, because that's what I was looking for.
You know, I think I can relate to that a little bit. I'm a bad student. I barely graduated high school, barely graduated undergrad, barely got my MBA. And I remember in the MBA world, being younger and not having work experience at that stage, I like just everything was black and white. And then when I get my first job in a small business, I'm inappropriately trying to apply standards and ideas and thought patterns to that small business. And I mean, I certainly wasn't tenured enough to try to do that. And then B, I was just wrong over and over and over again. But that first year was so hard because I'm like, no, you're supposed to look at it this way. And that resiliency of small business is like, hey, there's the rules, and then there's the what actually happens and that X factor in there. When you came from, the bigger environments, did you have to kind of let go of some of that formality to kind of say, well, this is how this business actually operates, or how did you balance that?
Yeah, yeah. I oftentimes refer to a specific story in what you're referring to. So it was my first stop after Deloitte. I went to that startup pharmaceutical company that I mentioned previously, and the structure of the company was there was a CFO, a controller, and then I came in as the assistant controller. And the CFO and myself were CPAs, and so we were very you know, black and white, principles based, debits, credits, the whole nine yards. The controller was more on the forecast, budgeting and forecasting side, much more projecting the business as opposed to what the business was actually doing. And so the controller, his name was Jim. He approached me shortly after I started, and he said to me, Doug, I want to tell you something. Okay, Jim, I'll take your advice. He said, those actuals that you've been going through. He goes, nobody cares about those. I stopped. I'm like, Jim, what do you mean? Like, I just spent 5 years of my career, right? We had to get through the audit, and and we got the 10Q and the 10K, and Doug, I'm just telling you, nobody cares, and it hit me, and it obviously still to this day it has hit me. But you know, what he was saying was that how the business operated and what it did, it mattered, but it really didn't matter, because what people really want to know is where's it going, and how can we plan for the future, and how can we forecast based on those actuals. And so it was just so enlightening and really career changing for me, because it was a whole new world, right? Like,
Wow.
again, I was so tied up in these different accounting principles, and to your point, MBA lessons, and it should be this way. But then in reality, how's the business going to operate? And that was my first step into really transforming from an accountant into almost like an operational accountant, right? Like understanding, like,
Right.
in reality, like how can I drive value to the business, not value to the books, which that was a big lesson for me.
That's excellent. You and I met at that MSP. It was a nice size MSP, and that was an era of where I was coming from, like, a total bull in a china shop, where I just wanted to come in and say, rip it all out, and you're doing it wrong, and what are you, stupid? And to a more modest kind of, let's take it step by step type of mentality. And I remember us kind of going through, here's some, MSP centric financial targets and whatnot. And I know I had been so dogmatic that it's black or white. You're hitting it or you're not. If you're not, here's 5 things you can do. Um, let's pause there for a second. If you remember that era much at all, how awkward is it to sit in your position to say, okay, I know what I know. I know what this guy Josh is sharing with some metrics, but no one else cares, or no one else gets it yet. Like, what's the role that you have to play to say, I know the target, but I'm not operationally responsible for the day to day? How does your role sit in that, or how do you personally sit in that vantage point?
Yeah, yeah, great question. It's funny that you mention kind of the metrics that you mentioned, or that we first met on. Because many times throughout my time in MSPs, and I guess maybe for the audience, I did start with one MSP, and have since worked with a few different ones. And I have found myself quoting what I would call the Bering McKinley metrics, or the Josh metrics, right? Specifically, one that we've talked about is around gross profit, and it's supposed to be X%. And you used a phrase with me way back when, which was, is there a dead body on the floor? Right. And that's like very black and white. And so I found myself quoting those often. And I think, as far as, is it awkward for me, or, how do I approach it? So, I approach those metrics with kind of guardrails, right? Because, it is a nice place to, operate, within those guardrails. And it can lead to success. But at the same time, there's a lot of, there's a lot of extenuating circumstances. For example, not all MSPs are created equally, right? So, you might have one that acquired a legacy business that is slightly different than an MSP. It's not your everyday MSP. And therefore, those metrics, although, good in theory, might not, be a great fit. And so, there's a little bit, and I think that's a true skill of an accountant, to understand, or like read the room of, like, okay, yeah, I've got these metrics. Do they fit here? And if not, how can I tweak these to kind of really serve, a purpose, right? Because, I think at the end of the day, if you're a good accountant or a good CFO or whatever, you have the ability to kind of adjust and be flexible and not give that black and white answer. And
Mm.
then, to the second part on solving it, the way that I've approached it is, I do think that I could, maybe cross my arms and say, I'm the accountant. I report on it. That's it, right? Somebody else is going to figure out how to change it or solve it. But that gets back into a little bit of kind of who I am or what I like to do, which is to solve things. And so, I prefer to kind of dig in and say, okay, here's the numbers, but then, maybe here's two or three things that we could, adjust or solve together to really get us back into those guardrails.
Right. Yeah. I think you just hearing the front end of that, I was like, "Oh man, I've come so far. I'm much more flexible." But I could feel my chest tightening as you're like, they may not apply here or there. I'm like, "No, they apply everywhere." So I still have some maturing to do, surely. And to that point, we're working with a nice size MSP, probably in the 5-7 million range, and just very diligent, awesome people. And I recognized late last week that we're through kind of phase one. So we've got this awesome service manager that his new boss or leader is coming in and saying, "Hey, the service manager is awesome at recognizing service salary, service revenue ratio, agreement gross profit, service department gross profit, all the stuff that we beat into this young person on day zero and for the last almost quite literally 5 years." And this new leader's coming in saying, "Hey, Josh, that's awesome. He gets it." But his blind spot is in operational metrics, right? He's kind of taking, one outcome and he has one, set of tools to impact that outcome. I need him to get, the 20 other tools available to him to impact that outcome. And I was a little embarrassed because I was like, dang, man, you're right. Like, I really just beat on these financial metrics so hard and show them the first few levers to pull. But there's a whole nother set of levers that I can sometimes ignore. So that's interesting that you say that when you do, because there are circumstances beyond just the P&L that are going to, define success or hindrance for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and it really comes back to that kind of that whole picture, fitting together. And I'm biased, right? I love the P&L, I love cash, cash is king, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, some of those operational metrics, especially in an MSP, I go back to my first MSP experience and in interviewing. I was given the question by multiple members of the executive team. They go, "We want to know what our gross profit per seat is. We need that. We need that." And I'm like, "Okay." And this is like I'm brand new. I have no idea, but now let's see, 8 years later, knowing what I know that scale can slide. You have things such as utilization, tools cost, churn, and net new clients, and all these different moving pieces. And so it's kind of funny. I would, if given that answer or that question again today, I would say that's pretty hard to zero in on an exact gross profit per seat. And it just, that gives me an inkling or a desire to ask more questions. Like, a question with a question, like, why are you asking that? Like, tell me, what are you trying to solve here? Rather than, trying to like peg down just one number.
That's it, and it's you've worked with lots of MSPs. I've worked with lots of MSPs, and it's always kind of fun. Now it's fun and interesting. Back in the day, for me, it was frustrating. But you'll meet somebody and they're like, "Oh, we really want to know X percent on this variable, gross profit per seat," or someone else, and for the longest time, I was just like, cool, dude. After that, let's figure out what your revenue per tree in your fucking parking lot is. Like, what other irrelevant shit do you want to bring up? That's
Yeah.
not quite as harsh as I am today, but I do when somebody brings something to me, you're like that, like, oh, here's a variable or here's a way of looking at it that we like. Instead of just shitting on it, now I do try to ask more questions. I might still shit on it, but I do like to kinda understand their thinking because 'cause they're not wrong. They just invented something in their head, and I guess your job, my job to some degree is to test it, to say, "Is that germane? Does that do anything? What will you do with that when you know it?"
Yeah, yeah, and, I think it's interesting, 'cause, a lot of times in my role, in my experience, I get into a lot of investigation and almost like data cleansing, and so, I'm very focused on, is the baseline data, baseline debits and credits correct? That's the old accountant Doug, like, he doesn't die, he's still there, right?
Right.
But then on top of that, like, okay, once we've established that the numbers are accurate, then we can have a meaningful discussion, right? Then we can talk about, whatever, metric you're trying to do. And so that's been an interesting part of my MSP experience is that data cleanse that, really, trying to make sure that underlying information is correct. And I go back to, some conversations that I've had with you where, you've given me the advice of like, Doug, the minute that you start talking with a client about, is this information correct? We're off track. You might as well kind of stop and then, restart later. And so, that's another piece of advice that you've given me that I've taken to heart.
Well, sadly, 2 things have fed my family, paid college tuition, paid my car payment. That is techs not entering their time and weak bookkeeping. Chart of accounts that are messy, inconsistent, categorization into the GL. Like those just don't go away. And it is, I hate, I mean, thank you for those dollars, everyone, but I do hate like seeing somebody spend the money they spend with us just to get to a baseline of now we can trust these numbers. Now your chart of accounts is appropriate for your business model. Because by the time they get there, they're exhausted. Like they're
Yeah.
financially exhausted, they're emotionally exhausted. And it's kind of like getting a new muffler on your car. It's like, cool, man. I just spent all this money. My car doesn't feel any better. It doesn't feel any different. It was leaking. Who cared? But I had to do it. So yeah, when you get in that spot of, oh, we can't trust this. All right, well, no sense looking at anything. We got to fix this first.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with your sentiment that kind of messy bookkeeping. It seems to be, I do have experience outside of the MSP world, but within the MSP world, it's there. That's a thing, and um, you know, I wouldn't say it's my preference. I like clean books because then I don't have to, get in the weeds and do a bunch of kind of procedure redesign and cleanup
Right.
work. That's not the most enjoyable work. That's not like it's more exciting to me to talk about the future and try to help owners meet their goals and that's more exciting as opposed to the cleanup. But it happens for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I don't know any other industries than MSP, unfortunately. So I look at our industry, I look at my own journey with understanding bookkeeping and a little bit of accounting, and it just is like, if there's one thing I can count on is your books are probably a mess. And I think that comes with a little bit of like, um, who is that founder of the MSP? They're technical, they're awesome. They want to go do technical things and the books might be 5, 10 years before they give a shit. And that good on them, you're making a living, you're doing what you're supposed to do. But yeah, you had your wife, your cousin, just making sure invoices got out. Like the whole story stops with, did invoices go out and did we get paid? Using the financials as a business decision tool. comes way, way later, if ever for some people. Do you observe similar with some of your smaller clients or your yeah,
Certainly. You mentioned earlier, Josh, like different phases that you go through with your clients. I call it steps to maturity and financial maturity, right? So you've got that first dollar of like, all right, I made a sale, and you're all pumped up and jazzed up, and that's kind of that first phase of just getting cash in the door. But as you grow and these MSPs grow, you get to a point where you probably need to step up your financial maturity and start looking at, okay, do these financials, how often do I need to close them? And, what purpose do they serve? Whether it's, just to file taxes or then, file
right,
taxes and, obtain capital or maybe an exit event someday. I mean, there's a bunch of steps of maturity that I see. And it's pretty fascinating and interesting to
yeah,
do a little bit of analysis of like, well, how did we get here? And whether it's the nephew that has an accounting degree or a friend that's done it for however many years. There is sometimes there is a little bit of a shelf life on that where somebody meets their level of maturity, and it might not be the fit. So yeah, I think kind of like you mentioned phases, I see that a lot from a financial maturity perspective.
We'll be right back with more, but first, here's a quick message from Bering McKinley.
Most MSPs are constantly busy, chasing tickets, projects, and fires. But without structure, it's hard to know if the business is really improving. Vision from Bering McKinley is the system that helps you work on your business, not just in it. It connects leadership strategy with daily execution. Vision aligns people, process, and performance, creating clarity and rhythm from goals to results. And the Vision app brings that structure to life, helping you create policies, track goals, review KPIs, and collaborate with your BMK consultant all in one place. Behind it all, Jetson AI, your assistant inside Vision, helps you find answers, generate insights, and take action faster. With Vision, you gain visibility, accountability, and measurable growth. You're not guessing, you're improving. Vision, Jetson, and the Vision app, your path from strategy to results. Start transforming your business today.
All right, let's get back to the conversation.
yeah, yeah. That financial maturity, I like the way you say that because yeah, I think you're definitely onto it. When you think about like the words budget and forecasting. Our mutual friend Gary comes in and helps Barry McKinley tremendously. And, over the last couple of years, we've tried to get into a forecasting rhythm. And I found that, I just stink at it. Like it is, as much as I try to understand, as much as I try to account for things, I just get bored would be the wrong word. I just kind of lose all sense of creativity. And thankfully, Gary, doesn't lose the sense of creativity. But when you think of a, $2 million MSP, a $5 million MSP, a $50 million MSP, is budgeting and forecasting, is that just table stakes in your playbook, or is that where do you place the importance of that exercise for the smaller mid-sized MSP?
Yeah. So a little bit of a loaded answer, but so I'll preface my answer by saying I'm a little bit biased, right? Because I think I find huge value in it, but part of that I'm going to say is depends on the user, right? Because I'm adamant in it doesn't make sense to produce information or produce a tool that isn't going to be used, right? And so what you're saying, you've had some challenges embracing it or living it or, using it to your advantage. I get it. And that there's a lot of different reasons for that. But at the same time, I've seen some really big success stories around, tying the budget and forecast to a financial goal, and then of having it be a really good tool in achieving that goal. So, I guess in its simplest form, just to maybe get a little bit technical for a second, budget and forecast, the way I would define them is, your budget is your budget. It's set one time a year. It's not going to change till next year. That's the budget. And then forecast, it does change throughout the year. The cycle that, I've used in the past is you have completed months and then you have months to go, right? So, a lot of the times, especially, and this works well with an MSP business, in my opinion, is you might have, 1 month of actual, 11 months to go, 6 months of actual, 6 months to go. And so that's when you're like reforecasting. And what I've been able to do, or others do, will forecast that down to cash, right? So not only are you forecasting the profit and loss statement, the balance sheet, but then you're ultimately arriving at what's my cash balance going to be at some date in the future. And so where I see that as a really powerful tool is that can drive a lot of different parts of the business. That could drive a sales campaign, that could drive a marketing investment, that could drive a technical hire, a management hire. It could drive M&A activity, tax planning. There's just a lot of different
Right.
offshoots where you take an accurate forecast or an accurate budget, and you kind of, if it's good, right, some of those too, and I think you would agree with this, Josh, is, the budget and forecast is one of those tools that it's only going to be as good as what you put into it, right? So if you kind of blow it off and say, "Oh, I think it's going to be that," you're probably not going to get a bunch out of it. But if you put a little bit of investment in there and, some thought behind it, it can be extremely powerful for, that whole range of MSPs that you just mentioned, 2 million up to 50 million, my opinion.
Right. We last year, maybe it was the year before last, we started using a tool called Live Plan. I think it's an Intuit program. Have you heard of that one?
I'm not too
Yeah.
familiar with it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's powerful. It helped me kind of visualize it better. I'm used to, an Excel spreadsheet where I'm like, well, we should be at that. Let me just divide by 12, click and drag, and it just wasn't all that helpful. The live plan experience really helped me as well. Doug, let me ask you this. The tax portion of it. Uh when I think of clients that I've seen that are just, super mature. They're awesome. They're making these quarterly predicted, tax payments. They're paying their sales tax. You're doing everything by the book. I'm always, because my world is a little different than that. I'm just amazed at how, these people get that done. So will you just kind of, for me, I don't think anyone else needs this lesson except for me. When you think about like quarterly payments for profit on an S corp, what kind of process do you go through to say, how do you know how much to send the IRS? Like, this really is 101 and you're teaching me something, so you can't make it too simple, by the way.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So with taxes, they are very black and white, very prescriptive. And so, you're going to have maybe two different portions to those estimated tax payments, Josh. You're going to have a federal portion and a state portion. And so then, depending on the state and depending on and depending on the profitability of your company, kind of your prior year results are going to drive your estimated payments for that future state. And so, there should be, or my understanding is that there's a very prescriptive equation that's like, hey, I made this last year. We're going to anticipate making it this year, and then you might grow it by, a couple points in order to build a little bit of buffer, because the federal government is happy to hold your estimates for the
Sure.
year. But I'll also say that not a tax accountant by profession,
Right.
so that's my understanding of the law.
Sure.
But really prescriptive by, basically as a general rule of thumb, pay what you paid last year and then maybe a little bit of a buffer.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. So S corp has, $1.2 million, MSP. They're doing $400,000 a quarter, $300,000 a quarter with 10% profit. So $30,000 of profit each quarter. The idea is that they're going to say, we'll probably owe 20% on that. And then they'll just send in that 20% of the $30,000 of profit. Am I saying it correctly?
Yeah, yeah. Quick math, on the fly here, but in theory, when they, file their prior year return, it's going to come down to say, okay, what did we make this year, and kind of in profit, and then estimate what that will be next year, and again build in that buffer. So yeah, yeah,
Okay.
you're on it.
Okay. And so you made this distinction that you're not a tax accountant.
Sure.
So yeah, not knowing this world all that well, I just think, oh, Doug knows everything. Like, I've known you a long time. I ask you the dumbest questions, the hardest questions, and you're like, yeah, I think, generally this is it. What the hell's the difference between a tax accountant and a CPA?
Sure. Yeah. So there's some, different offshoots to the CPA. That you're going to have kind of your public accountant, whether that's an auditor or an auditor of information systems, or what I would call, kind of like a public accountant, right? So serving public companies, a lot of, big four firms, or, now I think it's big eight, or there's a lot of, regional firms that are growing to that level. So that would be, in my mind, kind of like a public accountant. But then even within Deloitte, right, you have different departments. So you have like the auditors, but then you also have tax accountants. And so, what distinguishes, in my mind, a tax accountant is they're completing returns. And as you know, there's a bunch of different returns, right? You're going to have a corporate or a company level return, whether it's a C corp, an S corp, a partnership, et cetera, like a trust, or an individual. And so, there's different levels of taxes. And so when I refer to a tax accountant, I'm specifically saying someone that files taxes. So me personally, like, I don't file my own taxes. I don't file my
Oh,
business tax.
wow.
I work with a kind of a partner to do that, and it's really interesting. Like I said, it's not my main area of business, but I do think that there's a tax business, as far as getting the return done. So let's call that like baseline business. But then there's also a huge market for what I'd call tax efficiencies. And that's kind of digging in a little bit more of like, which type of entity is good for you? Or, oh, have you considered, yeah, whether you should have a building in your business or not? And my experience with kind of MSPs is that tax efficiency accountant is somebody really good to have in your like in your group of advisors. But that's not my role.
Right.
I'm kind of one of those people that maybe know enough to speak high level, but obviously I don't know, always advise like, hey, we would really need to talk to the true professionals here before we get too deep.
Do you find kind of like in IT, you hire an MSP and that they all seem so brilliant. Then you ask them a question like, "Oh, that's not really my area of MSP or technology." Then that client has the potential to be frustrated. How often have you been faced with well, wait a minute, Doug, what do I pay you for? What do you tell me? I got to talk to the other guy too. Is there any version
Yeah.
of that in your world, or do people have a little more maturity than I might have?
Um, I don't know. I guess, I take it as a compliment, right? I mean, you paid me a very nice compliment when you said, I think Doug knows everything. But then the worrier of Doug, the accountant, right, is like, oh my gosh, like, don't hold me to that one. But to the earlier discussion that we had about responsibility and getting used to having, like, wearing that thing, I'm very um confident and I like to be open and honest with clients around like, hey, I'm going to give you this answer, but if we want to talk about how confident I am in this answer, I think I owe it to you as a trusted business partner. So, but how often do I get like, what am I paying for you, or why do you have to go to a
Right.
specialist for this? Um, not too often.
Good.
I mean, I'd say I don't want to say the only issue I ever kind of say that about is taxes, but I feel like uh, I feel like that might be one of the
Sure.
most often ones that I say out loud.
I had the opportunity, it was a very positive experience that I needed to work with a tax attorney looking at some deal we were going to do. And I'd never even heard of a tax attorney before. And either I was really naive and dumb, uh, and they were just normal at their job, or they were just as brilliant as I think they were. Like that combo, as that person spent about 3 hours with us, I was just like, you're God mode. Like, you are so smart. You just get all the angles here. That may have just been blocking and tackling for me. But have you had the opportunity to work with those tax attorney folks before?
I have, yeah. At my firm, we refer to them as a tax partner. And so, in an accounting firm, a lot of the times that partner implies that they're an owner. And, but in my case, our tax partner is truly an outside vendor who is a partner to us, but he's a tax attorney. And I'm with you. The amount of tax knowledge in his brain is like wild.
Yeah.
And, I, I have like I have a unique relationship with him
Mm,
because he is the translator of tax code. And
okay.
tax code to me personally can be very frustrating. And so it's really unique. And you might go through this as well, where, you're getting that answer back and you don't like the answer. And so ultimately what you don't like is the tax code, but you have somebody explaining that tax code to you. And so, many times his name's Steve is who I work with. And I'm like, Steve, come on, like, come help me out here,
Right.
and that's interesting where those tax attorneys, in my mind, they they are very much in the box. They are very much black and white of this is what the tax code says. But as we talked about, there's that tax efficiency group. And so sometimes I want to say, I need you to be a little bit more tax efficiency here. And he
Uh,
does play in that realm a little bit. But that's something that even myself personally, I
right.
sometimes would get frustrated with that tax attorney.
I wish I could remember the woman's name. I see her stuff on YouTube, and I always watch it. I think her name is like Janine DeLuca. She's a
Okay.
tax attorney, and her whole shtick on YouTube is she'll listen to like somebody else's video, like this influencer saying, you can buy $1 million car, and if you do it like this, you'll pay no taxes. Like, just there's just endless amounts of it. So she reacts to it. And one of the points she made, and I know I'm going to say it wrong, she's like, there's like the tax code, there's the statute, and then what always wins the day is like the case law on it,
Okay.
where it's
Yeah.
like, and I think it's like, any scenario that she reacts to, she's like, yep, that's what the statute says. This is, how it gets applied. And then bottom line, this is how the court ruled the last time. And what you quickly find, or what I think I've quickly observed, is like the courts have seen it all, whether it's a chef saying I get to buy all these, shirts because I'm a chef, but I also wear them at home. Well, great. Well, the last, law, or the last court case that dealt with this said, no, you don't get to buy them. So that's how she always kind of comes to her final ruling on something. It's just, I don't know. It's fascinating. It's nerdy, but it's so real. And I think MSP owners, I think, tend to trend towards the conservative. I think when I see uh anymore, if I see somebody who's, really playing the game of trying to squeeze stuff onto their P&L and, ride the line of whether it's allowed or not allowed, pretty much they're usually pretty messy. And so people, when people tell me like I don't play that game, it's like, all right, cool. We don't have to I believe you that you don't play that game. So I think in our MSP world it doesn't come up too much for sure of people trying to play the games and getting themselves in those spots.
Yeah, yeah. I would say my experience has been the same way. If I were to summarize it, maybe MSP owners believe that um, you know, taxes are certain, they're a necessary evil, and just abide and move on and focus on other things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I would agree with that. Not a lot of there's not a lot of I don't know, wild west as far as taxes are concerned with MSP owners that I've dealt with.
I think that's probably true. Where it does get interesting and tough is I remember in like 2010 or 11 when New York State really started kind of paying attention to what is this MSP thing? What is this recurring revenue? Was the work done on site or off site? And man, I just remember just countless clients, being faced with this like New York State audit where they say you owe all this money and your clients owe all this money. And it was a nightmare. Do you ever have I think those days are pretty much behind us now. States have figured out what they're doing with it, but do you find those spots anymore in what you're doing?
Yeah, yeah. So I guess to talk about, different taxes and some of the consideration that I've seen in the MSP world. You of course have your annual returns, right? Whether it's federal and state, and for the most part, I'd say that that's stable. Even with kind of the addition of IRS agents that we've heard about in the past, whatever it was, 4 or 5 years. I think only one MSP that I've been through was picked for an audit, and that audit came back very clean. It wasn't much to worry about. The more of the audit activity that I've seen is on the state level at sales tax. And so sales tax, if I could, again, not a sales tax accountant,
Right.
but just to say, my feeling on sales tax, it'd be like, this tax attorney that you're mentioning, where the statute says one thing, the law says another, and then case law says this. Um, to me, for sales tax, there is no black and white answer. There's interpretation. There's do the best you can, and then ultimately, the is this going to be right or wrong? It would be if you have an audit. So.
Right.
Especially as I've seen some of these MSPs grow, sales tax um, is a hot topic, and it's also interesting as we go through sales tax solutions, right? So, have some stories with Avalara and TaxJar and these different, plugins. That's been an interesting, I guess, process to work through.
Yeah,
And then, one other offshoot of taxes would be like employer taxes, like employee taxes. And that's even changed in the MSP world with the introduction of PEOs, or professional employment organizations. And so they kind of say, hey, we're the easy button. And sometimes it's easy and other times it's not. So, taxes, uh, obviously, even though I say that I'm not a tax accountant, I'm still they're still impacting, that my day to day with my MSP clients.
for sure, for sure. Doug, staying on this theme of accountants and boundaries and how people classify themselves as accountants, one of the things that drove me nuts, and I get real, inflamed, for no reason, but early on when I would hear, oh, we're about to buy this MSP, or we're going to maybe even sell our MSP, uh, and they reference their accountant. Oh, our accountant helped us do this. Our accountant helped us do that. I'd get really frustrated, primarily because I'd gone through this like big, 3-month valuation course, and they kind of just said, "Oh, the accountant shouldn't be doing that." But I don't know what role do you think like Joe Blow's accountant in the strip mall in East Pitchfork, Nebraska? What role does he play in that merger or acquisition conversation of that $2 million MSP? Where do they live, or what's that, what might that team actually, what should it look like when we're going through that kind of exercise?
Yeah, yeah. Um, So, if I could kind of give some advice or think where that account, when we say accountant, what comes to mind and where I think they should play. So, that accountant I think should have, the baseline books in a really, really good spot. That gets back to that, debits and credits. Do these accounts, equal one another? And are what I would say are the financials up to date and clean. And so I think maybe to judge are they up to date and clean, you have to go with like what's not clean, right? Like what's an example of it not being clean, right? So there'd be like a fatal flaw of hey, I open up these books, they're out of balance, right? Huge no right, like that not clean, right? Or there's a lot of balance sheet accounts that can't be explained, right? Payroll adjustment, not sure what to do with this amount, like miscellaneous, that might appear on the P&L.
Right.
So if I open up books and see that, I'm starting to say, oh, what's going on here? So I think an accountant, as you're getting ready for a potential M&A transaction, whether it's sell side, buy side, you want the books to be up to date and clean. But then, there's probably some limitations where, that accountant might reach their level of maturity of to say, all I can tell you is these books are correct. And then they stop, right?
Right.
As far as like, but then you get into some like real transaction, or I'm sorry, like, some maybe additional services, whether it's like, okay, we want to take these books and transfer it into this company, or we purchase accounting as another another ball of wax. There's some real specialized skills there, that every normal accountant may or may not have. Now, some I've also seen some MSPs, Josh, that they have highly professional accountants. Whether they have financial statements that have been reviewed or audited, that can be a good investment because that's actually having a kind of a professional opinion that says these books are accurate. So it's one thing to talk to, I forget what you called him, like Joe Blow or something, and be like, are these books accurate? And he's like, yeah, of course they're accurate. Like, but the value or how reliable that is, if you have more of an accredited accounting firm, you're going to rely on that opinion as opposed to just that one man shop.
Right. Right. And I know you've participated and have worked through some M&A activity. Did you feel like, because I know that if you were my accountant, I would be putting so much pressure on you to be like, all right, Doug, help us with the valuation, help us figure out the offer, help us figure out if it's a good deal or not. I'd be putting that pressure on you. And I think it's tough as a provider like yourself to say, Josh, no, I can't do that, or I shouldn't do that. When you've been in those roles as a house accountant, or as a client of yours going through M&A activity, how strong do you have to set the boundaries of this is my role and not be tempted to breach into other areas either through your own desire or through the client putting your pressure on it?
Yeah, yeah, good question. It's very challenging. And I'm inclined to say that you don't want to let it become personal. Because going back to those metrics, some of the books that I've kind of inherited or taken on and been said, okay, well, here's the books. Now let's get through this transaction. I'm inclined to say, all right, I gotta own this. I gotta make sure that I'm taking these and putting them across the goal line, regardless of whether I'm the one that did the books or oversaw those books, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I think you know this about me. I'm competitive. I want to help. I'm dedicated, and so I do get personally invested in saying, okay, now you've relied on me, you've hired me to come in and do this. And so if it gets to a point and the transaction doesn't happen, I do take it personal. Like, okay, what could I have done differently? And now in reality, there's some times that they're just things are out of my control, right? The business wasn't a fit, or whatever the synergies they were looking for didn't add up, whatever it was. But specifically in that M&A space, I think at the end of the day, the buyer is trying to de-risk that investment as much as they can. Like they're making a big investment, they want to make sure it's a guaranteed thing. And so that can be a really challenging spot to sit in, right? Because you have your boss that's saying, get it done. You have this guy saying, de-risk, 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 and you're square in the middle of it. So I lived that story. I've lived that life. And I think that the advice, or what I've seen work best, is if you can, again, have those financial statements be accurate, right? Like, numbers don't lie, right? Like, if you do your accounting correctly, and they're there, the numbers are the numbers. And the story, okay, that might change. You might take a different lens on it. But if you can't poke holes in those numbers, that is like a really strong base to start from.
Makes sense. Doug, as I know some of your clients, and they vary in sizes and whatnot. What's just from your lens, what are you kind of seeing, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years out in just the landscape of MSPs, mergers, acquisitions, um, growth potential for MSPs? Just kind of what's your outlook on MSP land over the next couple of years? And any insights you can share with us?
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, uh, my reference point is going to go back to 2017. I think yours is a little bit before that, but based on 2017 and where we are today, I think the MSP world is in a good spot. Recent, and what I mean by that is, I'm seeing a kind of some growth across MSP clients, and the ability to continue to offer different products, not only table stakes, but some add-on products that are really helping, spur that MSP growth. And so, I would say that I'm bullish on where the MSP market's going, and I think in general, technology is not going away. When I go back to making that choice of entering the MSP world back in the day, part of it was technology is only going to grow over time as opposed to contract. So MSPs, I think, on the rise now from an M&A perspective. The latest reports that I'm getting is that the market is hot. There's a lot of kind of premiums being paid for MSPs right now. Um, and what's driving that? I'm not entirely sure. I think the access to capital is one of them. There's also, I think, some of those maybe early kind of early founders have reached their retirement age. They're ready to move on and
Right.
take on the next stage of their life. But I think next 3 to 5 years, I believe that there's growth there. And also the ability for a positive exit event.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to agree. I went to this like 1 day course sometime last year, and it was a really awesome group put it on, and they introduced this concept of like there's buying seasons and selling seasons, and they had this thing graphed out for the last 50 years, and they had all their evidence of like this was a buying season, this was a selling season, when it's good for a buyer, when it's not as good for a buyer. And whatever it was early last year, and they kind of looked at fall of 2025, and they said, we think that's when we're going to start seeing the selling season start contracting a little bit. And I think they kind of thought about a new administration, the cost of money, the pressure on the petrodollar, like a lot of stuff that's way over my head. And it's been because I don't know that they're wrong or they're right, but I like their insights. But man, I'm seeing deals every week right now. It just does not seem to have has slowed down at all. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I would. It's funny, because earlier I talked about staying out of the weeds and trying to stay strategic and high level, but kind of the nature of my role and how I partner with companies. Sometimes I'm like heads down, like grinding, getting through some things, and so I'd say that I've spent less time, kind of market wise, taking that wide view.
Sure.
But I'd just say through conversations and also, a little bit of the feedback is, how often am I getting an inbound for, hey, what about this and what about that? And, just as a like a quick story, I've had 2 or 3 people reach out and I've had to say to them, actually, the sale's already done. Like that one closed, last year. And so that's an interesting, like tidbit of like, that might be where the market is. Like that might be how much in demand it is by the time they got to us that, the sale was already done.
Wow. Yeah, no doubt. Well, Doug, it's been a pleasure. I always love talking accounting with you. You make it a little more lively for me, at least. Um, Hopefully, you enjoyed your time here. Where can people go and find you out in the world, Doug?
Sure. Yeah. My website is www.stonewallfinance.com. People can reach me via LinkedIn, message me there, or even my direct email is Doug@stonewallfinance.com, and it's always open for a conversation. And Josh, thank you. A lot of my journey in the MSP world has been with you, and I really appreciate all that you've done and for me, and also having me here today. So thank you so much.
Yeah, hell yeah, man. Well, listen, everyone else who's stuck around and listened to this conversation, hopefully you enjoyed it. Leave some comments. Tell Doug he's crazy. Tell me I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, or share your experiences around taxes, around mergers and acquisitions. We'd love to read your comments. And if we earned it, give us a like, a share, a subscribe. Means a lot to us. Bye.